So, alright, now I'm talking about Fathoms of Fear, and I pretty much try to do basically like original stuff whenever I'm making these games. There's no real point, just redoing something that's already out there. Especially as a solo dev, like you got the freedom, to like kind of go off in these wacky directions. A lot of them pick, depression and shit, which I guess is pretty relatable. A lot of high school stuff, I'm just really trying to do things that, both interest me and then I'm not seeing kind of all over the place. So, like the spooky diver concept, it just lends itself so well to horror because, what's down there is terrifying, like on its own. So, I mean, just what we know of it is pretty out there stuff. It gets pretty wild. There's so many ways that, like, scuba diving can just go wrong. Like, it's so equipment sensitive. You really need to make sure that, like, you're following safety guidelines. It's just inherently dangerous. There's a lot of room to just kind of go with your imagination. Like, you don't have to stick super close. It's one of those things that while it's interesting, a lot of people aren't super versed in just, how bizarre it gets down there. There's also a lot of beauty to it. Like, when you look at it, it just lends itself to using the light and the dark, the interplay there with just how dark the darks get and how bright the brights get. And then you just have that gradual fade. It's just something there that just, you're coming through, your shadows are casting off, and, next thing you know, something moves, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just, like, part of the constant ambient motion that comes from, like, the caustics, the light blasting against the ground, making all those wiggly, awesome patterns and stuff, or is it just, like, the way things wiggle, in the water? It's almost like when you look in a park, and there's like a breeze blowing through the air and there's nothing too sinister about it, but how many ways has cinema like sort of manipulated things, like the wind blowing, you get like that eerie call. It's about using the environment and what's inherently creepy, as the perspective of a human going down there. There's a lot going on there, and there's a lot to work with in terms of horror. Aesthetically, you've got the old-timey diver stuff, and as impractical as it may be nowadays, it's something that just holds. It's iconic, and a lot of the heavy lifting is done for you. You got the isolation. If you get in trouble, nobody's gonna help you. This was a great chance to sort of reuse a lot of the like assets I had created for the Nightmare Fishing Tournament. Like, if you see the encounters with the actual like large underwater creatures, all the fish monsters come from Nightmare Fishing Tournament because, I had them laying around. The way that game was structured, not a lot of people got to some of the later fish, which are intentionally the creepier, more nightmarish ones. And what I did was I applied a randomizer, so every time you hit the point where there's a fish encounter, you're gonna hit like 1 out of 15 different kinds of fish. So even though you have like the basic encounter figured out, hide in the bushes, shoot them if you want, kind of thing, you never know exactly which one you're gonna get. I know the R&D, like the randomness. All right, so I'm doing the game design contest this year, right? And I really wanted to work on something I was passionate about, and basically underwater is more or less like where I feel comfortable. In terms of, I've tackled the issue before, I know some techniques to kind of make it convincing. Well, the thing about Fathoms of Fear is it began life as an actual part 2 to a previous game I had done, Bloodbath Bay. Same concept, you go underwater, you're collecting snails, which, opening up again, Bloodbath Bay is actually a remake of a game I made called Bloodbath Bay. It was a 2D version, sponsored by a company online called fog.com, and the deal ended up going through, and I made like $5,000. I had to split it with a partner. Like, that was one of the times that I worked with coding, just somebody who did the code for me very early on, back when you could make money in Flash games. And, we put out Bloodbath Bay, and there was this creature that talked to you. but it did it telepathically, right? And it later revealed that that creature was like the knob on the end of one of those anglerfish that lure in, right? Like all of it brings the fish closer, like in Finding Nemo is a pretty famous one. People know that one. And also, like, later when you eventually come across Atlantis, the fishmen have, like, grotesque sort of angler mouths with, like, the punch-through jaw. Like, there's this big gap in the middle. I don't know how well this picks up on camera, but I actually painted this. It's, you can see it's an anglerfish with two naked dudes hanging off of it, kind of plugged in through, like, these, little wires that just feed in like umbilical cords in their back there. I painted that a couple years ago, and I've just been kind of looking into the whole anglerfish thing, and there's a whole bunch of diverse types down there. So again, a lot of deep sea nightmare type material sort of integrated into what I'm trying to pull off. There's a sequence later where, like, you get your helmet taken off by a monster that's been stalking you. You know, your head doesn't cave in from the pressure the way that it probably would in real life. You know, a lot of people in the testing, they called bullshit on that. I had a reason. The game was attempting to get crowdfunding to get, like, some support while I was building it. You know, basically, it didn't reach its goal. So the story may or may not, you know, ever see just where I want it to go, but I have ideas, and the head not crushing in is part of where I want the story to go next. Basically, you're in Atlantis, and you find you're not the only one in Atlantis. There's been other people. You passed a few shipwrecks on the way down. Those people are the ones who are on the ship who got taken by the Atlanteans, right? Because what they're doing is they're kind of making hybrids down there. They're trying to grow their army. They're trying to expand, like pretty much any civilization. And they're taking people from topside to do it. So the way I had it set up was these crystals, like you end up interacting with one. They integrate crystals as their technology, sort of like the Disney Atlantis, right? So you got this civilization running on crystals. They're doing hybrids down there. They're pulling people from the surface, right? And they're taking them down there. And what's happening is once you get into Atlantis, there's like this mysticism, there's like a magic that kind of keeps like the pressure out there, you know, and it's magic. What more do you want? But it was going to be sort of integrated into the world, like based off of the crystals, and they were using them to sort of change these people. And the ones who didn't make it were the ones who were exiled to basically being chained up mafia style at the bottom of the ocean. You pass those as the player on the way in, and that's one of the creepier setup moments because you got your eye right on the dead bodies kind of floating there, just kind of wiggling. You know, they're pinging if you hit them with the ping. They're really meant to be sort of like the misdirection. And then later you're walking thinking, oh, good to be away from those bodies. Bam! This big manta ray jumps out the back, and the manta ray comes from nightmare fishing as well. You'll notice he has a rail on his back, right? Like a stairwell, like you're holding onto it going up the stairs. You're meant to grab that later, and it, like, kind of more story stuff, pulls you out of a bad situation. And what ends up happening is you ride it to freedom, and I don't mind telling you because I'm probably not going to finish it. But in Bloodbath Bay, this sequence does actually play out, and it's one of the more kind of alleviating sequences. Like, it's almost beautiful in a way, where you're facing these torments and these monsters, and you're jumping at shadows, wondering where the next attack is coming from, right? And then here's this big-ass thing just kind of peacefully working with you, and you're utilizing it. It doesn't seem to be bothered by your presence. It's just kind of this moment where you're part of this world that's so alien, you know? Even here at the bottom of the sea, under all these circumstances, you can still find moments like that. And I like to pepper that stuff in to kind of break up the horror, right? Like some people, like when they're making games, and there's nothing wrong with it, I guess, but it's just they hit you and it never ends. There's a subtle difference between a thriller and a horror, and that difference really comes in the pacing curve, right? Like, you've probably heard it again and again, but there's a reason. It's true. You know? You gotta take your foot off the gas sometimes to, you know, let the people breathe, let them think they're safe, that kind of nonsense. Like, it's very cat and mouse. And I think for all the credit graphics get, real thing with horror that's interesting from a development point of view isn't the thing that you see. Monsters, the lighting, the shadows. These are all tools. What we're interested in is what's going on in here, right? Like, we want to scare you and keep you on your toes. How you can do that is just infinite. There's so many ways, but you screw it up and it becomes like funny. You get like, you don't get what you're shooting for. So at its core, Fathoms of Fear is like a 2.5D side scroller, but the game's fully capable of being anything I want it to be. It's a little more nuanced than just like where I position the camera. Like, there's some gears and some tools that need to be reworked underneath the hood, but you can get it working in pretty much any way you want it to. And one of the other plans that I had is this monster, white rib cage sticking out, what the fuck am I looking at kind of thing that's stalking you. What you eventually do, and what I want to have happen, is you come to this like cave, right? Still 2.5D, but when you enter the mouth of the cave, like, you push into it and the camera suddenly swings in, and next thing you know, seamlessly, you're first person. You're wandering around this cave. Your moveset's limited. You're really only going to be like walking around, maybe a slight jump or whatever, but it's really meant to sort of hone in on that claustrophobic element of being in a cave at the bottom of the ocean, completely alone, completely fucked if anything goes wrong. I think gameplay-wise, if you remember that bit from Dead Space where they have like these like Velociraptor-style peek behind the corner guys, they peek at you, they pull back, and they rush you, right? I think you'll picture that in a first-person point of view, and then when you finally beat the thing, come out the other side of the cave and it kind of spins back into 2.5D. Just a little serving, just a little taste of like, oh, you thought you were safe, huh? Mechanically, you thought the camera was way out here and your guy was way over here. Whatever happened over here wouldn't matter. It does matter. And you pull it right up to their faces, right? So that's what I want to do. It's literal in-your-face horror kind of situation. Hey, it might still happen. I'd like it to happen, but we all got lives to lead, right? Fathoms was special because it was like third tier on the idea I'd already sort of pulled off. There was Bloodbath Bay 2D, Bloodbath Bay 3D, and then totally different direction. This game started life as being part 2 because Bloodbath Bay 3D ends on a cliffhanger. I literally got it up to where I wanted it to be, on the big fish. Spoilers at the end. But you don't fight it like I wanted to, where it burps up like, sea mines, and you're supposed to just be tactical with it. There was even a point where it goes to like vacuum suck you in as like being just a big head in a cave and you're fighting that. Yeah, what would happen was the character would fall, right, and kind of jam his knife into the ground, and after like mashing the button to like not get sucked back into the fish, the chains would be cut from the sea mines that get burped up, and then you hanging on as the mines go by and slam into the fish. It's a video game, so you gotta do it 3 times. That's the basic gist, and then the manta ray comes and saves you, like I mentioned. I mean, hey, someday. It's just the thing is I'm one guy, and I can only really do like so much, and I'm already doing a lot. And to say that I've learned from each project going forward is a complete understatement. Like, you just, there's so many mistakes you're making in the beginning, but you just gotta persevere, man. You just gotta keep getting up and saying, I'm not gonna let this beat me, and then you learn from it, and then you go, oh, well, now that works, I wonder what else I can do. And then it just kind of step by steps from there. Next thing you know, if you're not careful, you're really fucking good at something, I want to win this year in the hobby category that I'm trying, game design contest, so fingers crossed. I mean, that's pretty much it. I guess I'll probably wrap this up and probably cover the next one that I'm working on. It's some kind of fortress defense. I don't even have a name for it yet, but it's actually coming along pretty well, so commentary on that coming up.